When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to stand up, speak out, and get in trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble.
Yes.
That's why we need to restore
The vote.
Woo, restore the vote.
Folks, that was Congressman John Lewis yesterday at a rally on the Capitol grounds, driving home the issue and the importance of a new bill to address the issue of voting rights in this country. You might remember the Shelby versus Holder decision where the Supreme Court essentially gutted a key provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So far, Republicans have been unwilling to move on this particular bill. They, frankly, haven't done anything, even though a Republican has offered a solution to fix the issues raised by the Supreme Court justices. Moral leaders yesterday organized that particular march. They were joined by NAACP, other civil rights activists, plus various elected officials, again, driving home the critical issue of voting rights. It is a fundamental right in this country. And of course, with a number of local elections coming up this year, plus of course, you have the midterm elections in 2018. Voting is going to be a crucial issue. Let's talk about this very issue, this bill, and what can be done to elevate and raise, of course, the people to rise up to force this through. Reverend Dr. William Barber, the president and senior lecturer, repairs of the breach. Of course, he was joined by several members of the clergy out there. We also joined by Reverend Jennifer Butler, CEO of Faith in Public Life. Also joining me right now on the panel, Angela Saylor, Director of Coalitions for the Republican National Committee, Mary Curtis, columnist for Roll Call. We'll be later joined by Barbara Arnwine. Dr. Barber, first I want to start with you. 4 years since the Supreme Court decision and still no action by Republicans in Congress. They have no inclination whatsoever to do anything on this very issue because, frankly, they're benefiting from voter suppression.
Yeah, the longest filibuster and interposition nullification we've seen since 1957 when Strom Thurmond filibustered the Civil Rights Act for 24 hours. We've had 4 years of filibustering. And everything that we said and everything that the justices said, like Ginsburg, what happened has happened. Every state in the South has passed voter suppression. North Carolina had the worst. Took us 4 years to beat them. Even the Supreme Court had to agree with us, even Clarence Thomas. At the very time Jeff Sessions was backing away, as soon as he became Attorney General, he pulled out of the case, and then the Supreme Court said it was surgical racism. We've also just had a victory on redistricting. Racist redistricting took us 7 years to win, but we won, 6 years to win. Now, you have many Republicans talking about fraud. There is no fraud. The case of fraud is fraudulent. The reality is, however, the case of voter suppression has been proven and upheld by the Supreme Court in unanimous decisions.
Jennifer, it was very interesting how after President Barack Obama's election in 2008, all of a sudden there was this massive rush by various states to enact voter ID laws. I remember the case out of Pennsylvania where the justification for that was voter fraud. Yet when they got sued and they went to federal court, they had to submit documentation, and the Attorney General of Pennsylvania submitted documentation saying, one, they had no proof of voter fraud, and in fact, if they did, the voter ID law they had still could not stop it. You had the leading Republican in that state stand up and say Mitt Romney was going to win the election because of voter ID. So when I hear Republicans say, well, everyone should have a voter ID, it's about voter fraud, that is a lie. It is a fraudulent argument because in case after case, Texas, when they went before the federal court, they presented 12 cases in 10 years with more than 25 million votes cast or whatever the number was.
Yep. That's right. It's a lie. It's an assault on human dignity. And that's why faith communities around this country have to mobilize and are mobilizing. That's why we're showing up today in front of the Supreme Court at 10 o'clock, and we welcome all people to come and stand with us because we have to begin mobilizing now. We're seeing the impact now on our public policies. This is why they're able to do the most massive redistribution of wealth in our recent history with this health care reform bill. This is why we have an attorney general who can pass harsh sentencing reform acts and put black and brown people in jail at a massive rate. Racism is growing across this country, and we're undoing the gains of the civil rights movement. So we have to build a moral movement around this country to begin to protect people and protect human dignity.
And how is that happening? I mean, how are you? I mean, have you seen any success of folks on the other side of the aisle, conservative evangelicals who voted with Donald Trump in significant numbers, who frankly have been unwilling to say a word about voter suppression?
We actually are building a movement that includes evangelicals and Catholics and Jews and Muslims. State by state, we're building a movement. We're having people stand up and defend voting rights. And you are going to see a massive movement of faithful voters in 2018 that will defend everybody's right to vote.
Reverend Barber, I want to go back to you. Again, what is interesting to me is when you have a Republican like Jim Sensenbrenner out of Wisconsin who has this particular bill. When he first introduced it, he had several Republican co-sponsors. The next session, he had half of that. Each year, fewer and fewer Republicans have signed on to that particular bill. So this is not a Democratic bill. This is a Republican member from Wisconsin. Even his own party does not care about this bill. And Bob Goodlatte, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, does not even want a hearing.
Well, it's a plan, bro. They cannot win. You would not have the Congress you have today without the voter suppression. And it's not just photo ID. In North Carolina, they tried to roll back same-day registration, early voting. You would not have the Congress you have today without the racist gerrymandering. So if you support fixing the Voting Rights Act, they will undermine their political ability. That's what this is about. 22 states since 2010 have passed voter suppression laws. Now watch this. Those same states are the states that need health care reform. They need health care. They need living wages. So there's a direct correlation between racist voter suppression, racist gerrymandering, and electing people who are undermining our attempts to get living wages and health care. We also know that in North Carolina, for instance, we had Republicans that went to jail with us. Now, they're Roosevelt, Eisenhower type Republicans, and we had many clergy because people are starting to understand long before the Russians hacked our system, voter suppression and racist gerrymandering and hacked our system. And I want to say that we're talking about apartheid redistricting. We're talking about racism. We're not talking about just political motivation. The courts have said, even the Roberts Court, even Clarence Thomas had to agree that the cases in North Carolina and that were the worst of all around the country was racism, systemic racism. But it's all a part of a plan. If you lie about voter fraud, if you don't act and fix the Voting Rights Act, then you allow people to win by cheating. We have an illegal legislature, for instance, in North Carolina. Lastly, we don't agree with the Sensenbrenner bill because that bill would have only had Alabama and Texas covered by the Voting Rights Act. People don't know that about the bill. It was a slick move. He was trying to get us to approve something that would have left North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, New York, and many other states out of the pre-clearance coverage.
What time is today's rally?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock? All right. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right, folks.